Thank you for joining us today at this virtual presentation of the Hispanic Economic Impact Summit, brought to you by the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Metro Orlando. My name is Gabi Ortigoni, and I'm the president and CEO of this organization that for over 28 years has been serving Central Florida as the leading voice of the Hispanic business community, particularly in the areas of commerce, coaching, and community development. In 2018, the Hispanic Chamber introduced the Hispanic Economic Impact Summit, a research-centric event that has become a trusted resource for local executives, elected officials, and business owners who want to better understand and engage with the fastest growing segment in our community, Hispanics. Based on the 2020 U.S. Census data, there are more than 63.5 million Hispanics contributing to the economy with a combined gross domestic product of $2.6 trillion. Hispanic Americans collectively serve as the 8th largest economy in the world. As a reference, from 2007 through 2012, 86% of new small businesses in the United States were Hispanic owned. These numbers have made of this group the force behind small business growth in America. Today, we will learn from two subject matter experts about what the new data shows regarding the impact of Hispanics in the United States, but particularly in Florida and our Orlando-Kissimmee-Sanford metropolitan statistical area. Before I introduce our keynote speakers, we want to thank our sponsors: Walt Disney Parks and Resort, OUC, the reliable one, Orlando Health, University of Central Florida, Universal Orlando, Valencia College, Travel and Leisure, the City of Orlando, and AT&T. Thank you for all the support. And to give us sponsorship remarks from our top sponsor, I'm pleased to introduce Mario Mendolaro, Principal Counsel at Walt Disney World and board member of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Gabby. I am Mario Mendolaro, Principal Counsel for Disney here in Central Florida. We at Disney are proud to be a sponsor of today's Hispanic Economic Impact Summit. This year, Walt Disney World hosts the world's most magical celebration as we reach our 50th anniversary. This milestone is not only a celebration of Walt Disney World, our cast members, and our guests, but of our commitment to Central Florida and our community. The stories of Walt Disney World and Central Florida are intimately woven together. We have grown together, supported one another, always looking to the future and celebrating the rich tapestry of life we experience here. A critical thread in that tapestry over the last 50 years is our growing Hispanic community, which now accounts for more than 30% of residents here in Central Florida, and which continues to see unprecedented growth according to the latest 2020 census. As a result, opportunities to establish and support Hispanic-owned businesses are paramount for our story here in the region, aiding economic prosperity and societal change and strengthening the already resilient and enduring fabric. At Disney, we know that when we stand behind Hispanic businesses, we support an important element of our presence and a rapidly growing and pivotal piece of our future. From our support of the Hispanic Chamber and Prospera, to our commitment to supplier diversity and our contributions to the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, Disney is proud to support the community, and we look forward to another 50 years of partnership. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, as we recently welcomed back international travelers, that in 2019, Central Florida hosted more than 1 million travelers from Latin America. These travelers also play a critical role in Central Florida's economy, and it is our commitment that our parks, our cast, and our community continue to represent their stories. To all those that visit and work and live and own businesses in this happy place, bienvenidos.
Thank you, Mario, for your leadership as a member of our board, and thank you, Walt Disney Parks and Resort, for your continued support of the Hispanic business community. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. An Goon, also known as Luke. He's a data dissemination specialist at the U.S. Census Bureau. Today, he will cover how the Hispanic population has impacted the states of Florida growth in the last 10 years compared to other ethnic groups, how Central Florida is among the largest areas for Hispanic population growth in the nation, and the tools to identify the diversity index and Hispanic data. As part of his work functions, Luke provides data presentations and training workshops to a wide range of census data users of all skill levels, including business owners and entrepreneurs. Luke graduated with a bachelor's degree from Cornell University. He's a native from Vietnam and emigrated to the United States in 1992. He's been working with the US Census since 2008 and has been recognized with the Census Community Champion Award for his outstanding outreach and educational work. Thank you, Luke, for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the nice introduction. Hola, muchas gracias. My name is Anh Nguyen. I am a data dissemination specialist from the US Census Bureau. I am based out here in Atlanta, Georgia. Some people call me Luke, and that is perfectly fine with me. And I'd like to thank Ms. Gabby Ortigoni and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Metro Orlando for having me on the program. It is an honor for me to be part of this effort to reach out to our Hispanic community and business organizations. Increasing services to the underserved communities is part of our dissemination branch, and I'm glad to be here. Now, over the years, I have had the privilege to working with many Hispanic organizations across the Atlanta region, and many of them in the Central Florida area as well. Today, I would like to bring you some of the latest data on the Hispanic population and businesses as a way to celebrate Hispanic heritage in the United States, but also as a way to increase more understanding and thus by providing more needed services and to the community. And be rest assured that we are a team of data dissemination specialists working with you on the ground on a daily basis across the country, either in person or in a virtual environment like this. Our Atlanta team provides data services to the 7 states in the Southeast, or the Region 4, as colored in purple on the map. First off, I would like to share some of the great news, the success of the 2020 census count. And we would not achieve it without your partnership, your engagement and advocacy, and your participation. Now, the census reported that there were more than 331 million people in the US, among which more than 330 million were residents in the 50 states and close to 350,000 living overseas. The Hispanic or Latino population, which includes people of any race, was 62.1 million in 2020, which, by the way, is about the same size of the country of Colombia or Italy. The Hispanic population has grew 23%, while the Hispanic population, the non-Hispanic population, grew only 4.3% since 2010. Now, in the state of Florida, is among the states that gained a lot of population in the past decade, more than 2.7 people since 2010 census. And Florida also gains 1 congressional seat as a result of the 2020 census. Currently, there were more than 21.5 million people in the state of Florida, making Florida the 3rd largest state in the US after California and Texas. Now, over the past decade, Florida population has grown at almost 15%. Now, together with California and Texas, Florida was the only state that had a Hispanic population of more than 5 million people or more. And you can see the Florida white population now at 51.5%, and the Black African-American population actually declined since 2010 census, down to 14.5%, and the Asian grew about 3%. Now, but there was a sharp increase in the Hispanic or Latino population, now at 26.5% of the total population, or 5.6 million Hispanic in the state of Florida. Now you can explore the data further by using the 2020 Census Race and Ethnicity interactive tool, as I show here, to drill down further to get more data for Hispanic population at the county level. For example, as I show here for Orange County. And you can see the numeric change, the percentage change of the population. And also at the bottom there, you can see the percentage and the ranking of the Hispanic population in the US. On the left-hand side, in the state of Florida, in the middle, and then for Orange County on the right-hand side. And there's another wonderful tool that I use, and you can use, called data.census.gov. Is the data platform for which you can look up the 2020 census data. For example, here I'm looking into the population data for the Metro Orlando area, also known as Metropolitan Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford Metropolitan Statistical Area, MSA. For example, and show here, the 2020 census redistricting file showed that out of 2.6 million people in the Metro Orlando area, there were more than 856,000 Hispanic. And Osceola County experienced the biggest jump, and thanks to the skyrocketing Latino Hispanic population, Osceola County Hispanic population grew 45% from 268,000 to more than 387,000 residents. And of course, the villages that you heard a lot already. The villages, part of it is Sumter County, but is the retirement community in Marion and Sumter counties, was the fastest growing metro area in the US, with a population soaring more than from 93,000 to roughly 130,000 in 2020 census. When it comes to the Hispanic population, the US Census Bureau has made population projection and estimates based on the decennial census count. Now, as you can see here in the infographic on the left, on the right-hand side, the national Hispanic population grows steadily over the years, with an estimated of more than 18 million in 2019. However, the detailed Hispanic population by racial groups have not been released, perhaps not until the spring of 2022. But for now, we can drill down further to understand the racial makeup of the Hispanic population. For example, on the left here, I used the data from the 2019 American Community Survey, which showing the breakdowns of the Hispanic racial groups in the state of Florida. Now, back to the 2020 census. If we look at the Hispanic population by county, Miami-Dade County remains the largest Hispanic population county with more than 1.5 million Hispanics. And here are the top 20 counties in Florida with the largest Hispanic population. And likewise, you can look into the cities in Florida. And Miami City has the largest Hispanic population, sitting here among the top 20 cities in Florida with the largest Hispanic population. And I just want to bring out a note about the maps, which I generated by using another data platform called Social Explorer, which is a data platform that using extensively census data. You can generate and even access the data by using data.census.gov, which I will go over shortly at the end of the session. The 2020 census populations more racially and ethnically diverse than measured in 2010, because the 2020 census provided a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition of the country because of the improvements in the way the question on race and ethnicity were being designed and processed and coding, which enabled the respondents to answer a more thorough and accurate depiction of how they self-identify themselves. Now, and another way to understand diversity is to understand the diversity index, which as a result of the 2020 census. What is a diversity index? It's just a number on a scale of 0 to 100 that represent the chance that two people chosen randomly from any area will be different by race and ethnicity. So the higher the number means more diversity, and the lower the number, the less diversity. So the 2010 census results show that the chance that two people chosen randomly are of different race or ethnicities group has increased since the 2010 census. And as you can see here, Florida diversity index jumped from 59% in 2010 to 64.1% in 2020, where also the Hispanic population made up of 26.5% of the total Florida population. Let's switch gear a little bit and look at the Hispanic business data that have been collected through many surveys and censuses from the Census Bureau. Now, in overall, the number of Hispanic-owned businesses had growth of about 3% from 2017. In 2018, for example, Hispanic-owned businesses made up of about 5.8% of all businesses, and with an estimated of $455.6 billion in annual receipts, and approximately 3 million people that were hired by Hispanic businesses, and with an annual payroll of about $101.1 billion. Now, for most of employer businesses with pay employees, Latino growth businesses growth rate was higher than the U.S. national average growth. And this is a significant note, as you can see that the Hispanic-owned businesses are increasing, and the Hispanic-owned businesses, they are among the job creators and income generators among all of the businesses. The infographic here also shows Florida is among the top 5 states with the largest Hispanic-owned firms, and as reported here by the 2016 survey of entrepreneurs. Another survey called the annual survey of entrepreneur that provides annual data on select economic and demographic characteristics of employer businesses. Employer businesses are businesses that have more than one paid employee. And so the survey also shows data on owners by gender, by ethnicity, by race, and veteran status. Here, when I go into data.census.gov and pull up the data from the annual business survey, the ABS, here it shows more than 68,000 Hispanic-owned businesses in Florida, and they're employing more than 445,000 people, and with an annual payroll of almost $17 billion. Now you can drill down further and to understand what it looks like for the Metro Orlando market. For example, here you can see that there were more than 7,224 Hispanic-owned employer firms. Or I can even drill down further and look at just the construction industry, as the illustration at the bottom shows. More than 1,112 Hispanic-owned firms in the construction industry in the metro Orlando area. Another set of data that help business owners, government officials to understand the impact and ways of and from recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Census Bureau at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I believe early in April of 2020, the Census Bureau, together with some federal agencies, put their heads together and thought, what if we put all the data all at one place so that government officials, business owners, emergency preparedness people, CDC, all can look at the data, the key demographics and business data, and that help them to understand and measure the impact of COVID-19. So we put it all together. We call it the Census COVID-19 Hub. It's on census.gov. That as a way it helped to design to guide the nation as it begins the recovery efforts from the sweeping COVID-19 pandemic by providing economic and demographic data. And you can see data visualization such as the impact planning report, which provide key demographics and key business data in one place. And then you can see demographic and economic analysis data, for example. And then if you are interested in some data set, and you can use the categorical data sets search features to locate or download some certain data set that interests you. For example, if I can pull the report for Orange County in Florida, I can see here, I can get all the key data in one place, even the number of people who speak Spanish in the area and the age groups. And then another example is the household pulse survey. If I want to know how the pandemic is impacting households, or I can use the household pulse survey data. The survey, it's a short survey, 20-minute online survey that's studying how the coronavirus pandemic is impacting households across the country from a social and economic point of view. The survey asks questions about child care, education, employment, energy use, food security, health, housing, household spending, even child tax credit payment. And you can select those variables by clicking on the top box on the top there. For example, in this case, I select food scarcity as one of the many variables I want to look into, and I get the data for the state of Florida. Now, there are some major, 10 major metropolitan areas in the country are also being included here in the survey, but not the Orlando metro area. The Miami, they market were being included in this survey. And here, if you want to looking for data that help business to cover, the hub also contains data that provides detailed data on 20 selected industries as well for all businesses. The owner and the workers are among groups designated for relief in recovery stimulus package, for example. So the hub can help officials identify areas that may be most affected and need the most help, for example. And then the small business pulse survey also measures the effect of changing business condition during the coronavirus. For example, if I'm going back here, you can see there were the small business survey, a pulse survey here. It shows, as an example, I pulled up here. I just want to understand whether there were increasing or decreasing price of goods and services in the area. And recently, we have added the vaccination tracker to help understand and get more insights into which area and which population group have responded to COVID-19 vaccines. Now, and trying to answer questions such as who is getting COVID-19 vaccine, who is reluctant about receiving it and why, and what state has the highest vaccination or reluctance or hesitance rate. And then, so you can generate that. And then you can see here at the bottom as well, and the data shows the Hispanic population vaccination rate at 82%, 82.1%, close to the 83.3% at the national average. Now, when it comes to business, we have to talk about business expansion, opening new business. And if your company buys or perhaps doing market research, chances are the basic of that research is census data. Now, there are a few surveys that get close to the quality of, but nowhere near the quality of the census data that we've been collecting through our economic census and some other economic surveys. And the tool that I want to introduce here is called Census Business Builder. Why? Because for businesses whose sales depend on individual consumers, the data is essential. The data tells us how many people are living in certain area. It describes the living arrangements, ages, income, education, commuting to work, occupations. It even describes the kinds of homes that people have in terms of the age of the home, number of rooms, value of the house, whether it has complete kitchen or plumbing facilities, and the ability of the availability of having a telephones or not, and on whether household having automobiles, cars, or the home heating fuel being used. Or for folks that are doing market research in understanding markets, the worker skill levels, or reasonable commute distance for the labor market analysis, or even for folks that are trying to understand the consumer or customers who, well, the ability to speak English at home, language data can be used to determine, their market research. So there are two versions of the Census Business Builder, right? The Census Business Builder, a small business edition, and the regional analyst edition that we designed with Chamber of Commerce in mind. Let's take a look at the Census Business Builder Small Business Edition, for example. As shown here, you can identify a location for, say, opening your business or expanding your existing business. For example, here I'm looking into the restaurant industries, and I want to open the restaurant in some certain area. Now, when it comes to small business, they tend to look into a smaller area, what we also know as the neighborhood area, right? And then I can, using the filter on the tool, to drill down on the targeted population that I want to serve, my business want to serve. In this case, I use the percentage of Hispanic population, for example. And the tool allows me to drill down even at the neighborhood level and to access the data for the Hispanic population compared to total population, and then the number of restaurants or in the business in restaurant industries that exist in the area. Now, and then I can generate a report, and that gives me more information about the potential customers that I will be serving, if the consumer spending, and the number of businesses in the area, meaning that it helps me to understand the competitiveness or our competition environment in the area that I want to get into. So that is the small business version does. Now, when it comes to organizations such as the chamber, we tend to have a look at a larger area, right? So we can use the regional analyst edition, for example, and you can select the region or by just drawing a polygon or a radius circle around the center of your area. For example, here I chose Jacksonville randomly, and I just draw a circle around all the counties around the Jacksonville market, and I include those in my so-called region and run analysis. So that's how you can build a region from one or more counties. And or I can just go change the geography by clicking on the Metro tab. And this time I just want to focus on the Orlando, Kissimmee, and Sanford metropolitan area, because that's the area of my interest. I want to understand how some certain business or how some certain sector perform. I can even drill down further by asking the two to just to sort out percentage of the Hispanic employer firms in the area, and it gave me the data on the bottom left corner here. Or I can set the parameter for the tool to search. For example, if I'm just looking interested into area with 15% of Hispanic or more population, I can set that parameter here by using the filter here on the top right-hand side. I can further look down further and say, okay, that's good, but I know that a lot of Hispanic businesses are into construction and restaurant business. So let's see, what if I want to get into construction in business? I can drill down further and see what the competition is like, or how that industry performs in my larger region. And I can narrow it down just to the construction industry to get the data. Or, and the data also show for whether these are firms with paid employees or firm with no pay employees. So that's a wonderful tool that we can definitely, small business owners, Chamber of Commerce can use. And we have tutorial videos, instructions that we put on Census Academy, or you can contact me and I can provide a one-on-one or with your group to explore this tool further. Now, before I end the session, I just want to let you know that we begin to release 2020 census data on data.census.gov. And a lot of our customers have asked about the data for Hispanic racial groups, how many Colombian, how many Ecuadorian in some certain area, how to look them up. The easiest way is to use data.census.gov. And you use the advanced search, you follow some instruction like I show here, and you go into selecting the geography, then the geography level, and for Hispanic, you just go into topics, race and ethnicity, Hispanic, Latino, detail Hispanic, and then you can see the breakdown for Hispanic. This 2020 census data for Hispanic racial groups will be available soon in the future. And I look forward to working with you and helping you to access data as much as I can. And that is the end of my presentation, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Luke, for providing such important update about the 2020 U.S. Census and for giving us access to the U.S. Census tools that are available for anyone to use. If you're interested in contacting Luke and learning more about how to use these data tools, please contact him at the information shown on the screen. I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors one more time. Thank you, Walt Disney Parks and Resort, OUC, the Reliable One, Orlando Health, University of Central Florida, Universal Orlando, Valencia College, Travel and Leisure, the City of Orlando, and AT&T. And also, I want to thank special thanks to our trustees for your annual investment. Thanks to your financial support, we're able to provide these programs and tools to our business community. Our second speaker is Dr. Marlene Orozco, Lead Research Analyst at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative at Stanford Graduate School of Business. This initiative is a research and education collaboration between Stanford University and the Latino Business Action Network. The primary goals of the research are to understand the state of Latino entrepreneurship by collecting and analyzing data and shaping research in this field, to advance knowledge and discourse by disseminating the results of the research, and to stimulate more informed policymaking, business partnerships, knowledge and skills development through its findings. Dr. Orozco is also the CEO of Stratified Insights, a research consulting firm. She holds a PhD and Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Stanford and a Master's in Education Policy and Management from Harvard University. Dr. Orozco's research has been featured in hundreds of media outlets, including Bloomberg, MarketWatch, Forbes, NBC News, CNN en Español, Univision, and many more. Thank you, Dr. Orozco, for accepting our invitation to be part of the Hispanic Economic Impact Summit.
Thank you, Gabby, and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Metro Orlando for extending an invitation to be here today to share with you all some of our latest research. My name is Marlene Orozco, and I am a lead research analyst at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, which we call SLAY for short. We're housed within the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies at Stanford Graduate School of Business. And we've been around since 2015, conducting an annual survey of Latino business owners to better understand both the opportunities and the challenges facing this fast growing segment of the business population. So I talked a little bit about the growth trends of Latino businesses, and this figure here shows you exactly that growth over a 20-year period. So Latinos are represented with the red trend line, and you can see it's on a historical uptick. And this is in comparison to the green trend line, which represents white self-employment, and this is on a historical decline. So again, Latinos are starting businesses at a faster rate than all other groups, and this is despite impacts to the labor market, right? So we see this continual upward trend pre and post Great Recession. We saw a downtick of the number of Latino businesses starting early on in the pandemic, but this has really ramped up. And this coincides with policies like the stimulus check, the stipends that folks were receiving. And so, you know, again, this is going to continue moving forward. And at some point in the near future, these two trend lines are going to intersect where Latinos are actually going to be outpacing or have a greater representation than white-owned businesses. Related to this theme of growth, we also looked at growth rate this past year across a number of states. So we were looking at the average growth rates for Latinos starting businesses. The average growth rate is about 6% across the country. And you can see here the states that are outpacing that growth rate. So Florida is one of them. Florida is a top 4 state where Latino businesses are located. The top 4 are California, Florida, New York, and Texas. And so within this time period of 2012 and 2018, Florida saw an increase of Latino entrepreneurship grow at a rate of 13%. We also find growth across virtually all industries. I think oftentimes misconceptions might lead one to believe that Latinos operate in singular industries. Certainly Latinos over-index in service industries and food and accommodation, but not all Latinos are in those industries. As this figure here shows, the size of the circle corresponds to the volume or the number of Latino employer businesses within that industry. And if you look at all of the circles, all of the industries above the blue trend line, Latinos are starting businesses in those industries at a faster rate than the national average. And so it's really important to think about industry distribution as we think about policies and ways to support Latino business owners, because again, although Latinos are racialized as a homogenous group, Certainly there's a lot of regional differences, and certainly as this figure here shows, there are a lot of industry differences as well to keep in mind. So as I mentioned, this past year, we looked at a comparison of white-owned businesses, and we looked at outcomes. And one of the outcomes in particular was revenue and revenue growth over a 2- and 5-year period. And we actually found that Latino-owned employer businesses, so those with at least one paid employee other than the business owner, him or herself, they're outpacing their revenue growth relative to their white counterparts, so white employer businesses. So over a 2-year period at a national level, Latinos were growing their revenue at a rate of 25% compared to just 19% among white-owned businesses. So these are definitely viable businesses that are not only starting, but growing in the short term. Now, if we look at a 5-year period, we see some stalling in revenue growth. And there are a couple of reasons why this might be. Certainly one, which we often, unpack, are the experiences as it relates to accessing capital. So with these challenges, it might be the case that Latino revenue stalls or declines. We have previously shown that securing external sources of capital is really key for scaling Latino businesses. You can only go so far by bootstrapping and using your own personal savings and that of your family and friends. You really need external capital in order to scale and continue to grow your business. And that is partly reflected here over this 5-year period. Secondarily, we also know that Latino-owned businesses are younger on average. And so that's probably what's also being captured here within that 5-year period. But nonetheless, important to note that Latinos are viable businesses and are growing their revenue at a fast rate. So now I want to spend some time looking at entrepreneurs, Latino entrepreneurs within Florida specifically, and then also get to Orlando. So it is our goal to every year augment our survey, our sample size of Latino businesses. So we have these national trends, these national benchmarks, but we also want to drill down deep and look at what the experiences are regionally, because of course there's a lot of variation there that happens across regions. So this past year we had 7,000 business owners take our survey, half of whom, as I mentioned, were Latino, half white. This year we conducted our largest survey to date of 15,000 business owners. So that means that we have a survey sample of 7,500 Latino businesses, which is going to allow us to look more deeply at regional trends. Again, it is our goal to continue on an annual basis to grow this, because as we start to look at some outcomes like financing, of that larger sample size, half of the Latinos within our sample will seek financing within a given year. And then as you drill down deeper, there's all kinds of different types of financing that we want to understand. And so we need to continue to have a large sample size in order to drill down. But here we have a look at what Florida-based Latino entrepreneurs look like. There are roughly 650,000 Latino-owned businesses in Florida. Near parity, near 50%. So 47% of all of those are women-owned. So Latinas are actually carrying much of the growth. When we think about these growth trends over time, it is really Latinas who are starting businesses at a faster rate than all other groups. And if we look at those, as it relates to the Florida landscape of small businesses, overall, 26% of those are Latino owned. So, this index is higher relative to population rates and business rates across the country. Now, of those 650,000 Latino owned businesses in Florida, it's really important to think about how many of those are employer firms. So if we think about business ownership as an asset similar to home ownership, right, this generates wealth. And so we want to know how many employer businesses there are. And there are roughly 9% of the businesses in Florida that are Latino owned are employer businesses. And so it's important to continue to grow and augment that number. We've uncovered in our research that the biggest hurdle for Latino owned businesses is not actually in scaling and growing to be $1 million business. The biggest hurdle, that is a challenge, but the biggest hurdle is going from a self-employed individual a solopreneur to an employer business, a business that has employees on payroll. So there are lots of technical assistance and programs that can be created around that, but that is the biggest threshold to cross, is the employer threshold. Among those who cross that threshold and then are able to scale their businesses, 3% are generating at least $1 million in annual revenue. Now, a couple of years ago, we conducted a Latino entrepreneurship gap report, and we're currently updating this report. And the purpose of this report was really to create a standardized measure so that we can compare regions to each other. And so we looked at, we created an entrepreneurship score, and a score of 1 means that there is equal parity in a given region for as it relates to population and business ownership. So you can see here that the #1 ranked metro area of the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, they have an entrepreneurship score of 0.59, which is the highest among all of the metro areas in the United States, but it is still not 1. If we look at the 2nd ranked, that is Tampa, and then if we move down to the 4th ranked, it is the Orlando metro area. So the entrepreneurship score is 0.36. And so again, if you consider these top 10, 3 out of the 10 are located in Florida. So it's important for our research in particular at SLAE that has a national focus. We continue to dig down deep into some of the experiences as it relates to these metro areas, which are fast growing in terms of their entrepreneurship rates, and also in terms of parity with the white population as a benchmark comparison group. As I mentioned, we're going to be updating this report, and the release of it will happen early next year. So we can see if that score of 0.36 for the Orlando metro area has grown, stayed the same, or has been reduced over the last few years. Now, part of our work has been uncovering the challenges. So I talked a lot about the opportunities early on as it relates to the growth trends, specifically for Latino-owned businesses. Now, persistent challenges that have existed for Latinos and other minority entrepreneurs have been challenges as it relates to accessing capital. Now, these come from historical legacies of discrimination in the country. Within consumer lending and home mortgage lending in particular, there are long-lasting legacies of redlining that have really hindered wealth generation through home ownership. And lending practices for small businesses are starting to be more, there's starting to be a deeper focus and regulation. The Consumer Protection Financial Bureau is starting to take a look at what some of these lending practices are. There are other policies like the Community Reinvestment Act, where banks have to ensure that they are conducting business in the local communities in which they're embedded. But nonetheless, accessing capital remains the #1 challenge for Latino-owned businesses. So we conducted a thought experiment, or not a thought experiment, we conducted a statistical analysis last year where we looked at the outcomes from a traditional source of capital, loans from national banks. And we looked at 2 businesses that are comparable on all measures. So they're in the same industry, they have the same revenue growth, same profitability, and for the business owners, the same personal credit scores. So if we compare those 2 businesses, and one of them is a white-owned business and one of them is a Latino-owned businesses, if you're a Latino-owned business, the odds of loan approval from a national bank are 60% lower. Now, this is as close as we've been able to report on kind of this notion of perhaps overt discrimination, in some cases implicit biases, but it is really critical with this particular finding that lending institutions look inward at what some of their processes are. Now, we're doing some additional work around the Paycheck Protection Program, which was one of the largest deployment of capital for small businesses in the history of the country. Over $800 billion were deployed to small businesses across the country. And there have been some recent studies that have shown racial disparities in lending across different institutions. So the top 4 banks, national banks in particular, the media has reported on the fact that early on, the Paycheck Protection Program wasn't getting to the communities that needed it the most, small businesses and Latino and other minority-owned businesses in particular. Now, the SBA tried to act on this in later rounds of the PPP. There were 3 rounds total. And so, for instance, in February, the SBA had implemented a 14-day exclusivity period where they just looked at, they just considered applications from the smallest of the small businesses and those that are minority owned. And so we're starting to unpack what some of those impacts have been. But early on with the initial waves of the PPP, we did report out that Latinos were half as likely to receive PPP financing. We do know that the impacts of the pandemic were both immediate and largely negative for Latino-owned businesses. 86% at the start of the pandemic, 86% of Latino-owned businesses reported large and immediate negative impacts. This past year, we conducted ongoing surveys with the same group of entrepreneurs, and we found that this negative impact was pretty consistent throughout this 3 and 6 month period. And here what this figure shows is that if we segment even further across gender, Latinas were the largest hit in terms of, they were more likely to report large negative impacts relative to all other groups. So 41% of Latinas were reporting large negative impacts. They were also twice as likely to close their businesses relative to their male Latino counterparts. They were twice as likely to miss their scheduled payments, rent, etc. And so what this means is, as we can think about, again, policies and programs to support recovery efforts as it relates to the ongoing impact of the pandemic, it's important to consider segmentation across gender as well, given the disparate impacts that Latinas in particular experienced or continue to experience. Now, one of the things that I think was a really kind of pivotal moment for the pandemic was the role that business organizations, whether they be Hispanic chambers of commerce, trade associations, nonprofits, they played a key role in terms of synthesizing and distilling all of the vast changing information as it relates to the pandemic about the PPP, about other relief aid opportunities, about grant opportunities, etc. How to translate, how to transition some of your business workings, operations to a virtual platform, etc. So there was a lot of technical assistance happening as it relates to those transitions, and we found that this past year that among Latino business owners that participate in formal business organizations, those that are what we consider to be networked, they were more likely to experience funding success. So you can see here the bars in the middle are organizational networks. They played a key role for businesses across the landscape. 63% of Latino-owned businesses that participated in organizational networks had funding success this past year. So again, organizations were critical. Organizations, business serving organizations are also places where Latinos meet capital providers and other kind of advance other business opportunities. So again, all signs point towards the positive impact of business serving organizations. And I think also, part of the challenge early on is when you experience economic recessions, or something like a pandemic, individual philanthropic giving goes down. And a lot of these organizations which operate as nonprofits, they were also strapped for, having capital to deploy all of the programmatic efforts that they needed. There are some new programs that are being piloted. The SBA is piloting a community navigators program where they really understand the fact that there are these central organizations, which they call hubs. And from these central organizations, there are a number of spokes or kind of partner collaborating organizations that continue to distill down the information to the ground level, to where the businesses are. And so this whole infrastructure, this whole network is really key in order, again, to move resources and to move information. So what does all of this work mean? Why does SLAY exist? Why are we thinking about supporting, or first of all, understanding the experiences of Latino business owners and supporting their growth and their scale? Well, a few years ago, we conducted a thought experiment, and we asked ourselves, what would happen if we just focus on the current number of businesses, of Latino-owned businesses, and we supported them with resources and education and information to ensure that they continued to grow. And we found that there would be an additional $1.4 trillion added to the US economy if, in fact, we just focused on Latino-owned businesses. And so this presents an enormous opportunity for the country as a whole, and certainly for places like Florida that represents 12% of all Latino-owned businesses across the country. It is very important for the local economies of Florida as well to continue to think about ways in which we can support the growth and scale of Latino businesses. I have my email here. So if there are any questions as it relates to the talk today, I'm happy to answer them. I know this is a recorded session, but nonetheless, I look forward to continuing to engage. And I want to share a little bit more about what's on the horizon for us. So I talked a little bit about how this past summer, we fielded our largest survey to date of 15,000 businesses. And so we're currently in the thick of data analysis to explore what the ongoing impact has been, not just as it relates to the pandemic, but also some other kind of comparative trends. So again, we have this benchmark comparison group of white-owned businesses. We want to see in what ways are they the same, in what ways are they different. And as a teaser, there are some really interesting findings that are surfacing as it relates to strategies that were deployed in order to navigate and mitigate the negative impacts of the pandemic. In general, Latinos are a very optimistic and resilient bunch. At the height of the pandemic this past summer, we found that 80% of Latinos reported that they would likely recover from the effects of the pandemic. This was comparable to that of white-owned businesses. And this is despite reporting a number of challenges as it relates to accessing the PPP early on. When we surveyed that same group of entrepreneurs in September of last year, that same group still reported high optimism, around 67% last fall. And that was largely because of the continuation and the looming closures as it relates to the pandemic, but optimism was still high. Now, the pendulum didn't shift to very negative or pessimistic. It kind of went into a neutral space. And so with this past year, what we're starting to uncover are the ways in which that optimism and resiliency really fueled the operational impacts. You'll hear a lot about business pivots. How did businesses shift and change in order to offer new products and services, in order to operate in a new virtual environment? And we saw that Latinos in this regard were not being left behind, but they are actually leading the way. And so there's a lot of heartening things that are coming from our next State of Latino Entrepreneurship report. We also are starting to unpack a little bit about the jobs that Latinos create for these local economies. So there was a lot of talk throughout the pandemic of Latinos being essential workers, and certainly they are also essential business owners, but they're essential job creators as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what some of the qualities and characteristics are of the employees and the jobs that they produce for these local economies. So be on the lookout for that. And then the last kind of theme that we're unpacking this year is around financing viability. So last year we conducted the analysis where we looked at, through our statistical models, fairly similar businesses and what their outcomes were. We want to unpack some of the lending criteria that institutions have historically used to determine credit worthiness. So these include notions around or metrics around collateral and one's capacity to repay the loan. So looking at their credit, looking at other C's like character, which is a really ambiguous classification, but something that lenders also look towards. So more to come on the horizon, and also, more to come as it relates to looking at entrepreneurs, Latino business owners in the Orlando area specifically. Part of our work is in working with organizations to disseminate our survey to ensure that we oversample in areas where there is interest, when there's organizational interest, to understand what's happening regionally. It's really helpful to have these trusted partners and organizations disseminate our survey. So similar to, if you think about the efforts around the US Census, the population survey that happens every 10 years, there were similar efforts around collecting a survey of the census for businesses. And this would happen every 5 years. This was called the Survey of Business Owners. This Survey of Business Owners was discontinued in 2012, and it had been supplemented with a new survey. It's now called the Annual Business Survey. This survey happens every year, but the data are released, a few years after data collection. So it's hard to understand what's happening real time. But it also only focuses on employer businesses. And so in any case, surveys like the one that we're conducting at SLAE and have been conducting since 2015 are really critical to understanding the experiences in a nuanced way. So I talked a little bit about how there's variance across region, across gender. Latinos are also not a homogenous group in terms of like immigrant status, for instance. So we look at outcomes as it relates to US native born Latinos compared to immigrant Latinos. We look at other outcomes. We gather some data around nationality. It's really important that we continue to support efforts around data collection, because that is really the first step in terms of informing subsequent policies and programs, is understanding what some of the needs are, but also some of the opportunities. So with that, I will go ahead and close out, and again, welcome any questions and comments via my email as shown on the screen here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Orozco, for the work that you do to elevate the understanding of the economic impact Hispanics have in our state and nation. Our chamber will continue to work with the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative and the Latino Business Action Network to help Our chamber will continue to work with the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative and the Latino Business Action Network to help them gather more regional data for the research. We have come to the end of our program. Thank you for your time today. This presentation will be available on our website. Please help us share this valuable data with other corporate executives, elected officials, and small business owners. Before we finish today, we want to invite you to our Don Quixote Awards Gala on December 11th. This event is presented by the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Metro Orlando and Prospera to celebrate the contributions of outstanding individuals to our local economy. For more information, please visit donquixoteawards.com. If you or someone you know are interested in becoming a member of the Hispanic Chamber, we invite you to join this vibrant organization by visiting our website, hispanicchamber.net. Thank you again for watching this virtual presentation of the 2021 Hispanic Economic Impact Summit. We look forward to seeing you in person at our next event. Muchas gracias.